Hello, we are here to talk about TS Eliot's last poem that's set for study, The Journey of the Magi. Magi was written in 1927, so it's much later than the other poems that we've studied, and it was written after he had converted, or been baptised is a more accurate way of describing it, into the Anglican faith. The story is a monologue. It's spoken by an old man, and he is one of the three wise men. Magus is a wise man, a kingly figure, who went in search of the Christ child. The poem is quite short, and it's distinctively different from all of Eliot's other poetry. And the tone is far more happy, resigned, as though he's reached some kind of personal resolution to his own private search for meaning. It opens with a reference to a sermon which was delivered by a guy named Bishop Lancelot Andrews, a sermon that he delivered in 1622. And the point of this is the quest that the Magi are on for the Christ child. And most interpretations of this poem see that this is reflective of Eliot, or analogous to Eliot's own search for spiritual meaning and significance in his life. So it's told in the first person. It's a monologue. There are no references to the normal Bible story. There are no gifts, there's no camels, there's no star to guide them. In fact, it's a rather crusty, cranky opening to the poem. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of year for a journey, and such a long journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. So we're here in a desert setting, and we know that because we know that. Note the alliteration: cold coming, worst time of the year, ways deep, weather sharp. Lots of patterns interconnecting those words there. In the very dead of winter. And that's a half line. We see a lot of half lines bringing things to an abrupt conclusion. The camels, gaulled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. This is a picture of suffering. It's not just the humans who are on the journey who are suffering, it's also the camels who are taking them on the journey. Galled means chafed, so their feet are hurting. And they lie down in the melting snow. Well, that's being difficult. So they are very uncomfortable. We're getting the physical details of the discomfort which everybody on this trip experiences. And the step-by-step recount of it makes the traveller sound tired. They've been through a lot of pain. We've got an accumulation of, I think it's 7 or more irritations, and it's told to us in the present continuous tense. So look for the ing words. So a cold coming we had of it, lying down, bringing sherbet in, cursing, grumbling, running away. This means it's happening now. So we get this sense that we're out there with them and we're having a pretty rotten time of it. We're taking this journey along with them, and we get a list of what happens one at a time. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. So this is a reference to sensual pleasures. It's a sharp contrast. It's summer, palaces on slopes, and the bright sunny image of the terraces, and the luxury of the silken girls with the promise of a bit more pleasure than that. Bringing sherbet, so it's exotic, a romantic image, and he wants to be delivered from this world. His journey is one in which he's going away from the former life and he's coming to a new world. But on the way, there are times we regret it. He longs for the former life and is sad to be leaving, longing for home. Then the camel men, cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out, and the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile, and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. Now there we have a big long list. It's our friends the Cindertons and the Silken Girls. 1, cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and the night fires and the lack of shells and the city's hostile and the town's unfriendly and the village is dirty and charging high prices. I lost count, I don't know, 7, 8, something like that. But it all adds up to a pile of discomforts that is weighing him down, the pressure of awful things. The polysyndeton makes it rambling, gives it an insistent quality, and the accumulation of all of these connections makes us feel overwhelmed by it. At the end, we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. So they're foreign in an alien land. They're trying to make a journey to a new place, literally. Doing that means that they're homeless, they're in transit on their way to a new place. But metaphorically, what's happening is that Eliot is making a journey from his former life into a new one. The ground that he traverses, the experience of making the change, is profoundly uncomfortable. And in the end, he decides just to go ahead and push through and do it, with the voices singing in our ears saying that this was all folly. On one hand, that's a reference to the sirens who lure men to their death with their seductive voices, but it also reflects the world in which Eliot himself lived. He was active at a time when the intellectual tradition that shaped him did not set a high value on religion. Eliot was quite anomalous in this respect. It was fashionable for people of his ilk to be atheist, and in many ways Eliot was quite conservative, quite old-fashioned. You will remember that he remained, as far as anybody knows, faithful to his wife, although they were separated and she was in a mental institution, so it was physically impossible for them to live together. But he wouldn't marry anybody else until she had died. Eliot needed religion for his own spiritual good. The world that he was living in, the real world, was secular, and his friends derided him. When he did turn to religion and become officially an active member of the Anglican Church, his friends mocked him. So his old friendship groups, his old intellectual milieu, that life had to die. It had to be sacrificed so that he could be born into this new life where he had faith in Christ. Then we have a tonal shift. At dawn, which is always the sign of a new start, we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snowline, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness. So they do get through the hard times, and then there is a lovely sense of life being born anew. Water means that there's life. The watermill is a symbol of something which I'm going to have to get back to you about. And we have the image of this beautiful temperate valley, which is mild, it's ordered, it's fruitful. The running stream is a symbol of grace, and the watermill beats in the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky. Now this is a bit more ominous. When Christ was crucified at Golgotha, there were 2 other criminals who were crucified along with him. So these 3 trees are symbolic of the 3 crosses that Christ had when he was put to death. So the crucifixion is there despite this being a beautiful, fertile land. It's an omen. And an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. This is a reference to the book of Revelations, so an Old Testament story. And then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel and 6 hands at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver. So again, this is a biblical reference to the Romans who diced for Jesus' robe. So after his death, they drew lots to see who would get his clothing. And the vines and the wineskins are all symbolic of the Last Supper, where Judas, the traitor, who had been a follower of Christ, took 30 pieces of silver to betray him to the soldiers who would arrest him and put him to death. So we have a lot of Christian symbols woven into this image that they are travelling through a land where very similar things happen. But there was no information, and so we continued, and arriving at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place, it was, you might say, satisfactory. So much as we had the dribbling away at the end of the Hollow Men, we have an anticlimax here. When we actually reached our destination, then we found that it was satisfactory. The actual experience ceases to be the main thing. What has happened is that they have travelled into a new world, or Eliot has travelled into a new world, where the hard, bitter agony that the journey signifies is an allegory for the spiritual transformation that he went through. And then we have another time shift, and the tone changes to a reflection upon the experience. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set down this, set down this. Those are Othello's dying words, so we have a Shakespearean allusion here. And when Shakespeare says it, when Othello says it, he is saying how he wants to be remembered. And it's a similar structure here. I would do it again, but set down this, set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? Capital B, capital D. The capital letter signifies that we're talking about Jesus Christ. There was a birth, capital B, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. So it's absolutely true that there was a new world being born. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. So the discovery is that in going toward Christian beliefs, the old life has to die to make way for the transformation to the new life, and that process is hard and bitter agony. Losing his former life is sacrifice. When Christ comes into your life, it sweeps away the old order. We returned to our palaces, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation. So, although there has been a new spirit born in him, the old life is still the physical place in which they have to live. So he is spiritually, but not physically liberated. He needs to go back to the old pagan life, to the kingdoms, where the rules and the new beliefs and so on have not yet been moved on. And he feels alienated from his own world, no longer at ease here. In the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. Do you sense the similarity to the symbolism that we had in the Hollow Men? He's alienated from his own world, and although he's been happy to go through it, he is saying that the coming of Christianity inevitably displaces what went before it. And what's happening now in the modern world that Eliot lived in is that the secular world and science are rendering spirituality unimportant. So he has been stranded in a world that lacked spiritual life. And the journey of the Magi, the journey from the pagan world to the world of Christianity, is like his own world, where he has journeyed from the modern secular world into one where he is able to adopt Christian beliefs in an avowed way, but he suffers by doing that. The arrival of Christianity was a calamity for the old ways. It completely wiped them out. New beliefs displace old ones, and it is hard to move on. The paradox is that if you follow the Christian story through, Christ is born to die, but we have to die to be reborn in Christ. All very complex. It's a profound antithesis to his other poems, this hard and bitter agony of spiritual transformation. And at the end, he's asking the question, was it worth it? Were we led all that way for birth or death? I had seen birth and death, but I thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony, like death, our death. We returned to our places, but we were no longer at ease there. We were an alien people, with an alien people clutching at their gods. I should be glad of another death. Now, is he speaking of despair? He would like to be totally dead in the normal fashion. Is he talking about death because that's the way he can be reborn with Christ? He can go to heaven? Is it the death and resurrection of Jesus? Does he want to hurry on to the next world? We don't know. It's quite an ambiguous ending. Eliot had travelled to Rome before writing this. He'd seen Michelangelo's statue, the Pieta. He'd been formally baptised back in England into the church in 1927. And from this time forward, he became devoted to promulgating Christian beliefs. This is the first time that he wrote a poem which avowedly had Christian themes, and he didn't ever go back to writing in his old way. So Eliot himself is living in two worlds, the converted Christian one and also the world that he used to inhabit. So it's a complicated poem, but a short one, and one which is so different from the rest of his oeuvre that we can say that in the suite of poems you study for your HSC, this is a poem which offers some resolution. It's not a happy ending. It's not a perfect resolution because of the hard and bitter agony that the experience has been. Just to draw your attention to some of the linguistic devices, lots and lots of alliteration, lots of enjambment, the accumulation of the ands, the allusions, the fact that it's in just three verses, the inclusion of prosaic details along with the deep significance of exposure to Christ and the sense of going through the conversion to Christ, which is the deliverance, being reborn into a new world.